It's just after 3 in the morning on the 5th of August, 1962, in a quiet little cul-de-sac in Brentwood, Los Angeles. A middle-aged housekeeper walks down a dim hallway of a small stucco house and she notices something odd. A strip of light under a bedroom door. A telephone cord running unnaturally from the hallway phone into that closed room. She knocks. No answer. She knocks again. Nothing. Within the hour, a psychiatrist will pull up outside that house, hurry to the side window, break the glass with a fireplace poker, and climb into the bedroom. And there, on the bed, face down, one hand near the telephone, he will find one of the most photographed women of the 20th century. She is 36 years old. After being fired only weeks earlier, she has just fought her way back into negotiations that would put her unfinished film and her career back in her hands. She has just bought her first house, the first home she has ever owned in her life. And on the tile above her front door, in old faded Latin, are 3 words she noticed after moving in and decided to keep. Cursum perficio. I finish my journey. Nobody in that house on that night is thinking about Latin. They are thinking, how did we get here? That is the question we're going to answer today. Not with rumor, not with the wild theories you may have heard over the years. Just with what we actually know, and what we honestly do not, about the life of a girl named Norma Jeane Mortensen, who somehow became Marilyn Monroe. So settle in, get comfortable, because before we understand that night in Brentwood, we have to go a long way back. All the way back to a small hospital in Los Angeles on a warm summer morning 36 years earlier. The 1st of June, 1926, Los Angeles General Hospital. A young woman named Gladys Pearl Baker, 24 years old, gives birth to a daughter. On the birth certificate, she writes the name Norma Jeane Mortensen. The father's line is a problem. Gladys is technically still married to a man named Edward Mortensen, but they've been separated for a long time. She has also been close to a co-worker at the film lab where she works, a man named Charles Stanley Gifford. For decades, biographers suspected that Gifford was the biological father. In 2022, DNA testing using descendants from the 2 families strongly supported that conclusion. What happened between Gifford and Marilyn later is less simple than the old legend that he refused every form of contact. He kept his distance and never became a father to her, but later evidence suggests that at least limited contact may have occurred. For the child herself, though, the central fact never changed. She grew up without a father in her life. But Norma Jeane, as a small girl, doesn't know any of that. What she knows is that she has no father in her life. And what she is about to learn is that she is not going to have much of a mother in her life either. Gladys works long hours in a film lab, cutting and splicing negatives. And Gladys is not well. She comes from a family where mental illness runs deep. Her own mother, Della, would be committed to a state hospital. Her own grandfather had suffered a mental breakdown. Gladys herself would eventually be diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And she knows, even at 24, that she cannot raise a baby alone. So 12 days after the birth, she does something that will shape the entire rest of Norma Jeane's life. She hands the infant over to a foster family. Their names are Ida and Albert Wayne Bolander. They live in a small house in Hawthorne, California, a working town southwest of Los Angeles. They already foster several children. They are strict, deeply religious, and they treat little Norma Jeane, on the whole, kindly. Gladys pays them $5 a week. She visits when work, money, and her own unstable health allow it. And little Norma Jeane grows up, from the very beginning, understanding a very confusing thing. The woman she calls Aunt Ida is not her mother. The dark-haired woman who arrives on some weekends, sometimes warm, sometimes distant, is her mother. But that mother lives somewhere else. At the age of about 7, Norma Jeane goes to live with Gladys. Gladys has saved money, taken out a mortgage, and bought a small white house near the Hollywood Bowl. For a few months, this looks like a fairy tale coming true. There is a piano, There are new clothes. There are, for the first time in the little girl's memory, evenings with her real mother. And then, in January of 1934, Gladys suffers a severe mental breakdown. She is hospitalized and eventually committed to a state institution. For Norma Jeane, 7 years old, the effect is brutally simple. The brief experiment of living with her real mother is over. The only home that had begun to feel like hers disappears almost overnight. Gladys will spend most of the rest of her life in and out of psychiatric hospitals. She will outlive her famous daughter by 22 years. And little Norma Jeane, from that morning on, is what the law of 1930s California calls a ward of the state. For the next 12 months, she is passed from family friend to family friend. And then, in September of 1935, at 9 years old, she is placed in the Los Angeles Orphans Home Society on North El Centro Avenue. She will live there for 21 months. Not 8, 21. Almost 2 full years of her childhood in a dormitory of iron beds with numbers instead of names on the towels. She wrote about this later, and this we do know from her own words. She said the hardest part was not the food, or the chores, or the strictness. The hardest part was that she was not, in any real sense, an orphan. Her mother was alive. Her mother was somewhere in a hospital ward across the city. And Norma Jeane would lie in her bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if her mother remembered her at all. There's a famous story that from her dormitory window she could see the water tower of the RKO film studio, and that she dreamed, at 9 years old, of one day being on that lot. That story comes mostly from Marilyn Monroe herself, told years later to journalists. Some biographers believe her. Others think she polished the memory a little, the way we all polish our childhoods when we tell them. What matters is this. Somewhere in those long, quiet nights in that dormitory, a little girl began, in her own mind, to imagine a different life. A life where her name meant something. A life where her face was not just one more face in a row of iron beds. She left the orphanage in June of 1937. She moved from foster home to foster home. 7, 8, some biographers count as many as 11 different placements before her 16th birthday. Here we come to something that has to be said carefully, because Marilyn spoke about it herself. In several interviews and in her own autobiographical writings, Marilyn Monroe stated that in some of those foster homes she was sexually abused. She named no one publicly. She gave no address. The specific details have been debated by biographers for decades, and we cannot verify each individual incident. But she said it, more than once, in her own voice. And it shaped her, deeply, for the rest of her life. By the time she was 15, the state system was running out of options. Her legal guardian, a woman named Grace Goddard, was moving to another state and could not take Norma Jeane with her. There was one legal way to keep her out of another orphanage. She had to be married off. So 3 weeks after her 16th birthday, on the 19th of June, 1942, Norma Jeane Baker married a neighbor's son named James Doherty. He was 21, she was 16. He worked at Lockheed. She, by her own later account, cooked, cleaned, and tried, very hard, to be a good young wife. It didn't last, and the reason it didn't last is one of the great accidents of 20th century pop culture. In 1944, the world is at war. Jim Doherty joins the Merchant Marine and ships out. Norma Jeane, 18 years old, needs a job. She goes to work at a small aircraft parts factory in Van Nuys, California. The company is called Radioplane. It makes little unmanned target drones for the military. And one day, an army photographer arrives at the factory. His assignment is simple: take some morale-boosting pictures of young women helping the war effort. His name is David Conover. He walks the assembly line with his camera. And he stops, dead, in front of an 18-year-old girl in overalls, with brown curly hair and a face he cannot stop looking at. He asks her to pose. She is embarrassed. She says yes. Those pictures, taken in a factory that smelled of engine oil, are the very first professional photographs of the woman the world would come to know as Marilyn Monroe. Conover sends the pictures to a modeling agency, the Blue Book Agency in Los Angeles. The agency signs her. They tell her, gently, that her hair is too dark and too curly for magazine work. She agrees to dye it. Slowly, over months, brown becomes honey, and honey becomes gold. By 1946, she is one of the busiest young models in Los Angeles. Her face has appeared on more than 30 magazine covers, and she has made a decision that is quietly breaking her marriage in half. She wants to be an actress. Jim Doherty comes home on leave, and she tells him. He asks her to choose. She chooses the career. They divorce in September of 1946. She is 20 years old. 2 months earlier, in July of 1946, she had walked into the offices of 20th Century Fox for the first time. Executive Ben Lyon looked at her, sat with her, and said, in effect, "We need a new name." Norma Jeane Baker was not, he told her, a name for a marquee. They tried a few. Then, in a small meeting, Lyon suggested Marilyn, after a Broadway star of the 1920s named Marilyn Miller. Norma Jeane liked it, and for the last name, she offered her mother's maiden name, Monroe. Marilyn Monroe. She signed her first studio contract on the 26th of August, 1946. $75 a week. She was, by paper and by ink, no longer Norma Jeane. But here's what almost nobody tells you about those first years. She was not, at first, a star. Not even close. Fox dropped her contract after 1 year. She had appeared in 2 tiny films, in blink-and-you-miss-it parts. She was, at 21, a divorced blonde with a new name and no job. She went to Columbia Pictures for a brief second contract, and they dropped her too. She lived in cheap rented rooms. She borrowed money. She took the bus. She reportedly missed rent so often that a photographer she knew, a man named Tom Kelly, offered her $50 for 1 afternoon of work. The work was this. In May of 1949, in a small studio in Los Angeles, on a piece of red velvet, Marilyn Monroe posed nude for a calendar. She signed the release with a fake name, Mona Monroe, because she was ashamed. She took the $50, she paid her rent, and she forgot about it. 3 years later, when she was on the edge of becoming America's biggest star, someone would find that calendar, and it would nearly destroy her. But before we get to that, we have to talk about the man who, more than anyone else in those hungry early years, believed in her. His name was Johnny Hyde. Johnny Hyde was 53 years old. He was a vice president at the William Morris Agency, one of the most powerful talent agents in Hollywood. He was small, sharply dressed, and when he met Marilyn at a New Year's party at the end of 1949, he was also very ill. He had a heart condition that his doctors had warned him was terminal. He looked at this 23-year-old girl, and he told friends afterward, with complete conviction, that she was going to be one of the biggest stars in the history of the movies. Nobody believed him. Studios had already passed on her, twice. Johnny didn't care. He took her on personally. He paid for acting lessons. He introduced her to directors. He got her small parts. And in 1950, he got her something bigger. A supporting role in a John Huston film called The Asphalt Jungle. And then, almost immediately, a role in All About Eve, opposite Bette Davis. Both films are now considered classics. In both of them, Marilyn is on screen for only a few minutes. But in both of them, when she walks into a scene, the scene changes temperature. You cannot look away from her. It is one of the most remarkable early screen presences in film history. And it is a thing you can still see today, 75 years later, in less than 10 minutes of film. Johnny Hyde used those 2 performances to do the impossible. He got 20th Century Fox, the same studio that had dropped her 3 years earlier, to sign her again. A 7-year contract. She was, at last, a working actress with a future. And then, on the 18th of December 1950, Johnny Hyde died of a heart attack. He had known this was coming. He had, in his last weeks, asked her to marry him several times so that she would inherit his estate. She had said no, every time. She said later that she loved him, but not in that way, and that she could not marry a man for money, even a man she owed her career to. His family, who had never accepted her, threw her out of the house before the funeral. She stood on the sidewalk in the rain and, by her own later account, understood for the first time that in this business, without powerful protection, a girl like her was on her own. She was 24 years old. She had a studio contract, a new name, and no one, absolutely no one, in her corner. What happened next would turn her, in less than 3 years, into the most famous woman in the world. And it would begin with the same calendar photograph she thought she had buried forever. Because in March of 1952, a reporter from a Los Angeles newspaper walked into the offices of 20th Century Fox, laid a printed calendar on the desk of a publicity man, pointed to the naked girl on the red velvet and said, "That's her, isn't it? That's your new star." And Fox panicked. Fox panicked, and here's why. In 1952, America was a very different country. Nice girls did not pose naked. Movie stars did not have scandals in their past. The studios had morality clauses in their contracts, and a nude calendar photograph from 3 years earlier was, by the standards of the day, the kind of thing that could end a career overnight. The publicity department at Fox met behind closed doors. Their first instinct was to deny it. Their second instinct was to bury her. And that is when Marilyn Monroe, 25 years old, did something that changed the whole rulebook of Hollywood. She told the truth. She called a reporter she trusted, a woman named Aline Mosby of the United Press. She sat down with her and she said, "Yes, that's me on the calendar. I was broke. I needed $50. The bills were due. I signed a release with a false name because I was afraid of what the photographs might do to my career." She did not pretend it had been glamorous. She presented it for what it had been. A young woman short of money, doing a job because she needed the cash. The reporter asked her, "Weren't you wearing anything at all?" And Marilyn, according to Mosby's notes, smiled and said, "Oh yes, I had the radio on." That line went around the world in a week. Instead of destroying her, the calendar made her. America, or at least the America of 1952, decided that a young woman who admitted she had been poor and hungry was not a scandal. She was a human being. Letters poured into Fox by the thousands. Not letters of complaint, letters of support. Fox, watching the mail, made a decision very fast. They dropped the idea of burying her. They promoted her instead. Within months, her name was on every marquee they controlled. And in 1953, they released 3 films in a row that would make her the biggest new star in Hollywood. The first was Niagara. She played a young wife plotting to murder her husband at Niagara Falls. The film had a famous shot of her walking away from the camera in a tight red dress, for what critics counted as one of the longest walking shots in film history to that point. Audiences did not blink. The second was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. She played Lorelei Lee, the gold-digging showgirl opposite Jane Russell. And she sang, in a shocking pink gown surrounded by men in tuxedos, a song called "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend." The song existed before Marilyn, and the screen number was the work of a whole creative team, including choreographer Jack Cole. But the image that came out of it belonged to her. She made that pink gown, those diamonds, that mixture of comedy and calculation so iconic that generations of performers have been quoting the scene ever since. The third was How to Marry a Millionaire, with Betty Grable and Lauren Bacall. It was one of 20th Century Fox's earliest major CinemaScope productions, completed in the new widescreen process, even though another CinemaScope picture, The Robe, reached theaters first. And it was a hit. By the end of 1953, Marilyn Monroe was among the biggest box office names in America and the highest-ranked woman in the influential poll of American theater exhibitors. On the 26th of June that year, she and Jane Russell were invited to press their handprints and footprints into the wet cement in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. If you visit Los Angeles today, you can still put your hand into that print. Millions of people have. There is another small detail from that day that tells you something about the woman behind the image. At Grauman's that day, according to several eyewitnesses, Marilyn suggested a joke. She wanted to leave her handprint using something other than her hands. She wanted, she said, to sit down in the cement. The theater manager said no. So instead, she suggested they dot the letter I in Marilyn with a diamond and dot the O in Monroe with a rhinestone from her jewelry. That was her small, private joke about the gold digger role she had just played. The rhinestones were later stolen, but the prints are still there. She was funny. That is a thing biographers who actually knew her, from Susan Strasberg to Norman Roston, kept insisting for decades after her death. She was quietly, deeply, self-mockingly funny. She understood exactly what the world was doing with her image, and part of her found it, in her own private moments, hilarious. And in that same period, in early 1952, she also fell in love. His name was Joe DiMaggio. And to understand what that meant in 1952, you have to understand that Joe DiMaggio, in America at that time, was not simply a famous man. He was a kind of national icon. He was the son of Italian immigrants who had risen to become one of the greatest players in New York Yankees history. His 56-game hitting streak from 1941 remains, to this day, one of the most celebrated and seemingly untouchable records in professional sport. He had retired the previous year, in 1951, at the age of 36, still a legend. He was quiet. He was formal. He wore a suit and tie to dinner. He was, in almost every way, the opposite of the Hollywood man Marilyn had been meeting for the last 5 years. A mutual friend introduced them at an Italian restaurant in Los Angeles. Marilyn later said, in an interview, that she had not been especially excited about meeting a baseball player. She said, and this is close to a direct quote from her, that she had expected a loud, fleshy man in a purple suit. Instead, she said, in walked a quiet gentleman who barely spoke all evening. They started seeing each other, quietly at first. Dinner, long drives. He did not like her career, that has to be said plainly. Joe DiMaggio believed a wife's place was at home. He did not enjoy watching her be photographed by strangers. He did not ever really understand what she did for a living. But he loved her. And she, in her own complicated way, loved him back. They were married on the 14th of January 1954. It was a small civil ceremony in the chambers of a municipal judge in San Francisco. She wore a dark brown suit with a white ermine collar. He wore a dark blue tie. Reporters, tipped off, mobbed the courthouse. The couple gave a brief statement and drove away. Their marriage would last less than 9 months. And whatever honeymoon they had was already under pressure from the beginning. The marriage began to break, and it broke on one night in particular. A night in September of 1954 that gave the 20th century one of its most famous images, and that also, behind the camera, was the ending of a marriage. The film was called The 7-Year Itch. It was a comedy directed by Billy Wilder. And on the night of the 15th of September 1954, they scheduled a location shoot on Lexington Avenue in New York City at 52nd Street. The scene was simple. Marilyn, in a white halter dress, stands on a subway grate. A train passes underneath. The rush of air lifts her skirt. Now, what the public was told at the time was that a spontaneous crowd of a few hundred gathered to watch. In truth, the studio had tipped off every newspaper photographer in the eastern United States. Estimates of the crowd that showed up that night vary. Serious historians usually put the number in the low thousands, several thousand people at most, pressed into the street, straining to see. Whatever the exact figure, it was enough that the noise from the crowd ruined the audio. The scene had to be reshot later on a soundstage. But the still photographs of that night have gone around the world for 70 years. And standing at the back of the crowd, in a head pulled low, was Joe DiMaggio. Joe's old friend, the newspaper columnist Walter Winchell, had insisted on taking him. Joe had said no several times. Winchell finally convinced him, and Joe stood there, at the back, watching his wife, in front of thousands of screaming men, have her skirt blown up over her head, again and again, take after take. Witnesses, including Billy Wilder himself, later said Joe DiMaggio's face was completely white. He turned around without a word and walked away. That night, back at the St. Regis Hotel where they were staying, there was, by multiple accounts, a very serious argument in their suite. Marilyn's hairdresser at the time, Gladys Whitten, later said that when she came to do Marilyn's hair the next morning, there were bruises on her shoulders and back that had to be covered with makeup. This is one witness. It has been repeated by other biographers. It has never been proven in a court of any kind, and DiMaggio, for the rest of his life, refused to comment on that night. We tell you what the witness said, and we let you make of it what you will. What we do know, for certain, is this. 3 weeks later, on the 5th of October, 1954, Marilyn Monroe filed for divorce from Joe DiMaggio. They had been married for only 264 days. She stood in front of the courthouse. She wore black. She cried. She said, into the microphones, only 3 words about her marriage. Conflict of careers. And here is the strange and beautiful thing about Joe DiMaggio. The marriage ended, but the bond did not. For the 8 years Marilyn had left, he remained one of the people she could call when she needed help. When, more than 6 years after their divorce, she had a psychiatric crisis in New York, he came to her aid. When she died in that little house in Brentwood, he was the one who arranged her funeral. And after that, he guarded her memory in silence for the rest of his own life. But we'll get to that. Because in the winter of 1954, Marilyn Monroe did something that nobody in Hollywood expected. She quit. She walked away from 20th Century Fox. She walked away from Los Angeles. She got on a plane, alone, and she flew to New York. The reason was simple. She was, at that moment, the biggest female star in the world, and she was making about $1,500 a week. Meanwhile, her studio was making millions of dollars off her films. And, worse for her, they were giving her the same kinds of scripts, over and over. The dumb blonde, the showgirl, the gold digger. She had, by her own account, read those parts until she was sick of them. She wanted to be an actress, not an image, an actress. So in New York, in early 1955, in a small apartment near Sutton Place, she began doing something almost nobody knew she was doing. She was studying. She had convinced the most respected acting teacher in America, a man named Lee Strasberg, to accept her as a private student, and eventually to admit her into the classes at his legendary actor studio. The actor studio in 1955 was where the greatest actors of the coming generation trained. Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, James Dean before his death, Paul Newman, and into that room, one wet winter afternoon, walked Marilyn Monroe, in a plain black turtleneck, no makeup, hair pulled back, holding her scripts against her ribs. The students, according to several accounts, went silent. Lee Strasberg pointed her to a chair at the back. She sat. She did not speak that day. She listened. For the next several months, she trained. 6 days a week. Voice class, movement class, scene study. She read Chekhov and Ibsen and Dostoevsky. She was, by all reports of the people who taught her, a serious student. Susan Strasberg, Lee's daughter, who became her close friend, said later that Marilyn was terrified in every class, but she came every day and she worked. She was also negotiating from New York a war with her old studio, and she won something substantial. Marilyn had already formed Marilyn Monroe Productions with photographer Milton Green, and in December of 1955, she reached a new agreement with 20th Century Fox. The deal raised her salary dramatically, gave her meaningful approval over directors and other creative choices, and allowed her far more control over the roles she would play. She was not the first star in Hollywood history to seek independence from a studio, and she did not single-handedly invent the modern movie star business model. But what she achieved was still remarkable. At 29, after being marketed for years as a compliant blonde bombshell, she had forced one of the most powerful studios in the world to renegotiate with her as a creative partner. The woman they had treated as a product had learned to bargain like a producer. The first major test of that victory was Bus Stop. In 1956, Marilyn played Cherie, a nightclub singer from the Ozarks who dreams of escaping a cheap saloon and finding a better life. It was exactly the kind of part she had been demanding: funny, wounded, awkward, sometimes frightened, and very far from the polished gold digger parts that had made her famous. She deliberately roughened the character's makeup, used an accent, and let Cherie look tired when the scene required it. The performance earned some of the strongest notices of her career. Whatever people thought of Marilyn Monroe the celebrity, it was becoming harder to argue that the woman on screen could not act. That mattered to her more than almost anything. New York had not simply been an escape from Fox. The classes, the reading, the humiliation of starting again as a student, the months of negotiation. Bus Stop gave all of it a visible result. She had walked away from Hollywood because she wanted the right to fail or succeed as an actress. Now she had a film that showed why she had fought. And in that same period, the man who had re-entered her life in New York was changing it in another direction. His name was Arthur Miller. He was a playwright. 2 years earlier, he had written a play called The Crucible, and before that, in 1949, a play called Death of a Salesman, which had won the Pulitzer Prize. He was widely considered one of the 2 or 3 most serious writers in America. He was tall, quiet, professorial, with wire-rimmed glasses. He was married to his college sweetheart with 2 children. They had in fact met once before, in 1951, on a film set. He remembered her from that meeting. She remembered him. They had exchanged a few letters over the years, and in the fall of 1955, in New York, they began seeing each other quietly. His marriage was already ending. For Marilyn, Arthur Miller was, on paper, the perfect answer to a question the world had been asking about her for years. That question was, is she just a beautiful body, or is there a mind in there? Marrying Arthur Miller, the most respected serious writer in America, would be, in the eyes of the world, the answer. But it was more than that, and this we know from her own journals and from Miller's later memoir. She admired him. She wanted, desperately, to be taken seriously, and here was a man who read the same book she was reading, who thought about the same questions she was thinking about, and who looked at her, she said, as though she were a whole person and not a photograph. They were married on the 29th of June, 1956, in a civil ceremony in White Plains, New York. 2 days later, on the 1st of July, they were married again in a Jewish ceremony at a friend's house in Waukebach. Marilyn had converted to Judaism for him. This was reported in newspapers across the world. And then, 3 weeks after that wedding, they got on a plane to London. Marilyn had another film to make. It was called The Prince and the Showgirl, and this time, Marilyn Monroe Productions was directly involved in bringing it to the screen. She was going to co-star with, and be directed by, one of the most respected actors in the world, Sir Laurence Olivier. What was supposed to be a triumphant debut for the new, serious Marilyn Monroe was about to become one of the most difficult film shoots of the 1950s. And behind the closed doors of an English country house, in the very first weeks of her marriage to Arthur Miller, something was about to happen that would break something inside her that never entirely healed. Laurence Olivier and Marilyn Monroe were, in the summer of 1956, the 2 most famous actors in the English-speaking world. He was the classical theater knight, Shakespeare on stage, Hamlet on film. She was the biggest movie star on the planet. On paper, this pairing was going to be the film event of the decade. In practice, from the first day on the set at Pinewood Studios outside London, it was a disaster. Olivier, according to his own later memoirs, made a serious mistake at their very first meeting. He told her to be sexy. Just, he said, be sexy. Marilyn, who had spent the last 2 years in New York with Lee Strasberg trying to be taken seriously as an actress, heard this as an insult. She retreated. She began arriving on set late, sometimes hours late, sometimes not at all. Olivier, a man of the theater who had never worked this way in his life, began to lose his patience. He complained to the crew. He complained to Arthur Miller. Word got back to Marilyn, of course, and it only made her worse. She was also, and this is important, using medication. She had, by 1956, been prescribed sleeping pills for several years, going back to her Hollywood days. She was also being given amphetamines by studio doctors to wake up and be filmable in the morning. This combination, taken over years, is what physicians today would recognize as a very dangerous cycle. It disrupted her sleep. It disrupted her moods. It disrupted her memory of lines. And in the middle of all of this, in that rented English country house where she was living with her new husband, something happened that she wrote about one time in a small notebook. She found, on his desk, something Arthur Miller had written. In it, according to what she later told Lee Strasberg and a few close friends, Miller had written that he was disappointed in her, that he had thought she was one thing and now believed she was another, that he sometimes felt embarrassed by her. We have to be honest here. Arthur Miller, decades later, in his own memoir called Time Bends, disputed the exact wording of what she found. He said his notes were more complicated, more private, more a writer's working through of his own doubts than a judgment of her. Marilyn's recollection, given to Strasberg in a very upset state, may not have been the whole picture. But whatever the exact words on that page were, the effect on her was catastrophic. This was the man she had married in part because she believed he saw her as a whole person. And now, 3 weeks into the marriage, she had reason to fear he saw her the same way everyone else did. The shoot remained tense almost to the end, but the film was completed, and the production did not collapse under the strain. Olivier later wrote frankly about how frustrating he found Marilyn's lateness and dependence on her acting coach. Marilyn, in private, had her own complaints about him. Yet when The Prince and the Showgirl came out in 1957, the reception was more complicated than the later legend suggests. Reviews of the film itself were mixed, but many critics were warmer toward Marilyn's performance than toward the troubled production that had produced it. She had not crossed the Atlantic to make a disaster. She had crossed it hoping for an artistic triumph, and what she got instead was something less satisfying. A difficult film that nevertheless showed, again, that the camera found more in her than the people around the camera sometimes expected. She came back to New York. She tried for the next 2 years to build a marriage and a family. And here the chronology matters, because the losses came more than once. In the autumn of 1956, during the first months of her marriage to Miller, she suffered a miscarriage. In the summer of 1957, another pregnancy ended in an ectopic pregnancy that required emergency medical treatment. In 1958, she became pregnant again. That pregnancy ended in another miscarriage. She desperately wanted to be a mother. It never happened. And each loss landed on a woman whose childhood had already taught her to fear abandonment more than almost anything else. And in 1958, Billy Wilder, the director who had put her on the subway grate 4 years earlier, called her about a new script. It was a comedy about 2 male musicians who witness a mob hit in Chicago in 1929, dress up as women to escape, and join an all-girl band traveling to Miami. The band's lead singer, a soft, sweet, slightly damaged blonde named Sugar Cane, was written for her. The film was called Some Like It Hot. Her co-stars were Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon. It was shot in the second half of 1958, and by many accounts, from Wilder's interviews to recollections of people on the production, Marilyn was struggling badly during the shoot. She was pregnant again, exhausted, frightened of another loss, and increasingly dependent on medication to sleep. Some days, she could not hold even a short line reliably. Stories about the exact number of takes required for particular scenes vary, and Hollywood memory has a way of turning frustration into legend. What is not in dispute is that Wilder sometimes needed dozens of takes for lines that should have been simple, and that the delays exhausted the cast and crew. Tony Curtis, decades later, gave an interview in which he was asked what it was like to kiss her in the film's famous seduction scene on the yacht. He made a joke. He said it was like kissing Hitler. That line has been quoted for 60 years, usually to make Marilyn look terrible. What is less often quoted is that Curtis himself, in his own memoir published near the end of his life, walked the comment back. He said he had been frustrated and tired that day. He had said something stupid to a reporter, and he regretted it. He said, in the same memoir, that Marilyn on film in that movie is one of the most beautiful performances any actress ever gave in a comedy. And he was right. Because when Some Like It Hot came out in March of 1959, something remarkable happened. Whatever chaos had been on that set, whatever pain she was carrying, none of it is visible on the screen. What is visible is a comic performance so warm, so vulnerable, so alive, that critics have been ranking it for over 60 years as one of the greatest comic performances in the history of American film. In 2000, the American Film Institute named Some Like It Hot the funniest American movie ever made. She lost that baby too, a few weeks after filming ended. By 1960, her marriage to Arthur Miller was quietly collapsing. He had written a screenplay for her as a kind of gift called The Misfits. It was a serious drama about a broken young divorcee in Nevada who falls in with a group of aging cowboys. She was to play the woman. Clark Gable, the legend of Gone with the Wind, would play the aging cowboy. Montgomery Clift would play the wounded rodeo rider. The film was shot in the summer of 1960 in the Nevada desert. The temperatures rose above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Marilyn, by that point, was taking a heavy combination of prescription medications. She collapsed on set. She was flown to Los Angeles for a stay in a hospital. She flew back. She finished the picture. Clark Gable, who was 59 years old, suffered a heart attack shortly after filming ended and died 12 days after the last day of production. In the grief that followed, comments from his widow about the strain and endless waiting on the set were widely turned into a harsher story, that Marilyn's delays had somehow killed him. That was never a fair medical conclusion. Gable had been a heavy smoker for decades, had significant cardiovascular risk, and had pushed himself hard during a punishing desert shoot. But Marilyn encountered versions of that accusation, and friends later remembered how deeply the idea wounded her. For someone already trained by life to blame herself when people disappeared, the timing was cruel. The Misfits came out in 1961. Its reputation has grown with time, in part because it became the final completed film of both Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe. In it, Marilyn is not being funny for protection, and she is not being a bombshell for the camera. She is a raw, wounded, thinking woman on the screen, and she is heartbreaking. Many critics who have studied her career consider it among her finest performances, and some call it her best. 10 days before it opened, on the 20th of January 1961, she flew to Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and quietly divorced Arthur Miller. That was the same day John F. Kennedy was inaugurated as the 35th President of the United States. And a few weeks after that, in February of 1961, something happened that she almost did not survive. Her New York psychiatrist, a woman named Marianne Criss, had grown alarmed by Marilyn's state. She was drinking. She was taking pills. She was, at times, not entirely coherent. Dr. Criss told her she needed to check into a hospital for a rest. She recommended a specific hospital in New York. What Marilyn did not fully understand, when she agreed and checked in on the 5th of February, was that this hospital had a locked psychiatric ward. They took her keys. They took her clothes. They put her in a small room with bars on the window. She realized, with rising panic, that she had been committed as a mental patient and that she could not leave. For 4 days, she tried to reason with the staff. They would not release her. She was, on her admission papers, in the same category as any other severely ill patient. And in a very controlled, very deliberate act, she did something to try to force the hospital to release her. She picked up a chair, and she threw it at a glass door in her room, hoping the noise and the broken glass would force them to move her or to call someone who would. The chair, in her own written account of that day, did not initially break the glass. She had to try more than once. Eventually, the glass broke. She was, briefly, moved to a different, more secure floor, and she managed, from that floor, to get one phone call. She called Joe DiMaggio. Now, remember, Joe and Marilyn had been divorced for more than 6 years at this point. He had, in that time, remained close to her, quietly, without publicity. She had married and divorced another man. He had stayed in the background, exactly where she had left him, waiting. He was in Florida when he learned what was happening. He came to New York and pressed hard for her release from the locked ward. Over the years, the story acquired a wonderfully cinematic line in which Joe threatens to tear the hospital apart, brick by brick. Whether he said those exact words is impossible to establish. What matters is the part that can be established. He intervened, and Marilyn was transferred out of Payne Whitney and into a setting where she felt safer and could receive medical care without the same sense of confinement. He stayed close while she recovered. He did not turn the moment into publicity. Whatever had failed between them as husband and wife, the instinct to protect her had not disappeared. She recovered. She began seeing a new psychiatrist in Los Angeles, a man named Ralph Greenson. She began to try to rebuild. And in the spring of 1962, she started shooting a new film for 20th Century Fox called Something's Got to Give. That production would be a nightmare from the beginning. She was still not well. She was late. She missed days. And in the middle of filming, on the 19th of May 1962, she got on a plane to New York to do a favor for a man she had come to know socially. That man was the President of the United States. Now, we have to slow down here, because this is one of the parts of Marilyn Monroe's story where, over 60 years, more rumor, more speculation, and more theory has been generated than about almost any other subject in 20th century American history. So let's be very clear about what we actually know and what we do not. On the 19th of May, 1962, at Madison Square Garden in New York City, the Democratic Party held an early 45th birthday celebration for President John F. Kennedy. 15,000 people were in the audience. The event was televised. Various stars performed. And at the end of the show, in a floor-length, flesh-colored gown covered in more than 2,000 rhinestones, so tight that she had to be sewn into it, Marilyn Monroe walked to the microphone. Peter Lawford, the president's brother-in-law, introduced her, joking about her habit of being late by calling her the late Marilyn Monroe. She removed a white fur wrap. She sang in a breathy, almost whispered voice, "Happy birthday, Mr. President." That footage exists. You can watch it today. It is one of the most famous minutes of the 20th century. That is what we know. Now, here is what has been said for 60 years by many people in many books, on many television programs, and what has never, to this day, been proven. It has been alleged that Marilyn Monroe had an intimate relationship with President John F. Kennedy. It has also been alleged that she had a similar relationship with the president's brother, Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States. The evidence for these claims, when you look at it honestly, is a mix of things. There are the memoirs of a handful of people who knew her. There are phone records that show calls between her and government offices. There are recollections of her housekeeper. There is one weekend in March of 1962 at Bing Crosby's house in Palm Springs, where she and the president were both guests, and where several people present later said something happened between them, though none of these people is a first-hand, independent, sworn source. There is no photograph, there is no letter, there is no recording. There is no diary entry in her hand that says, plainly, this is what happened. Every serious biographer who has ever written about Marilyn Monroe has had to grapple with this material, and each one has come to a slightly different conclusion. Biographers do not agree on exactly where to draw the line. Donald Spoto, for example, judged a single sexual encounter with President Kennedy during the Palm Springs period plausible, while rejecting the idea of a sustained romance. Other historians are more cautious even about that. What is much weaker is the evidence for a continuing relationship with John Kennedy, and weaker still for a sexual relationship with Robert Kennedy. Those later stories depend heavily on recollections recorded years after Marilyn's death, disputed testimony, and books whose claims do not always survive independent checking. So that is where we stand. She sang Happy Birthday to a president. What happened, or did not happen between them, in private, is one of the areas of her life where we simply do not have the kind of documentation that would let us tell you, with certainty, one way or the other. And anyone who tells you they know for certain is telling you something they cannot prove. What we do know for certain is that in the 10 weeks between that birthday performance and her death, something in her life, in her mind, in her routine, began to move very quickly. And whatever it was, by the end of that summer, it would be too late to slow it down. She flew back to Los Angeles the next day, Sunday, the 20th of May, 1962. She was expected back on the set of Something's Got to Give on Monday morning, and the next chapter of her life would be the last one she would ever live. The film she was making, Something's Got to Give, was already in trouble. She had missed many days of filming before flying to New York. The studio, 20th Century Fox, had approved the trip to sing for the president only reluctantly, in writing, with conditions. When she returned to work on Monday, the 21st of May, the executives were watching her closely. She managed a few days on set. She was, by all accounts of the cameramen and her co-star Dean Martin, luminous when the camera was actually rolling. There is a scene in that unfinished film, a swimming pool scene, in which she famously slipped out of her flesh-colored swimsuit and finished the shot completely nude in the water. The still photographs from that day, taken by photographer Lawrence Schiller, went around the world within weeks. In them, she is 35, thin, radiant, laughing. She looks, in those photographs, like a woman who has decided to enjoy herself. But behind the pool, off the set, the situation was not good. She was still not sleeping. She was still on the same combination of prescription medications that had haunted her since London. She was seeing her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, sometimes twice a day, at his home in Los Angeles. Some biographers have raised very serious questions about the way Dr. Greenson treated her. He had, unusually for a psychiatrist, brought her into his family home. He had introduced her to his wife and children. He had, in the last months of her life, essentially placed her under the daily supervision of a woman named Eunice Murray, a housekeeper Greenson had personally recommended and who reported back to him. That relationship between Marilyn, Dr. Greenson and Eunice Murray has been debated by biographers for decades. Some, including Donald Spoto, have argued that Greenson had crossed serious professional lines, that he was controlling her life in ways no psychiatrist should. Others, including members of Greenson's own family, have insisted he was a devoted doctor who was doing his best to save a very sick patient. What we can say fairly is this. In the last summer of her life, Marilyn Monroe was almost never alone. She was surrounded by people who worked for her or who were being paid to watch her, and yet she was, by every account of her private words at the time, deeply lonely. On the 8th of June, 1962, 20th Century Fox did something almost unthinkable. They fired her. They fired the biggest female star in the world. They released a statement to the press blaming her for the collapse of the picture. They sued her for damages. Photographs of her, taken in that same period, show her sitting on the floor of her new house in Brentwood in a robe, looking at newspapers with headlines that called her a has-been at 36. She fought back. She did something that in 1962 very few Hollywood women had ever done. She hired a photographer, Bert Stern, and she posed for a series of photographs for Vogue magazine. She hired another photographer, George Barris, for a magazine profile in which she talked, in her own words, about the future. She sat down with a journalist from Life magazine, a man named Richard Merriman, for a long, careful interview that would be published, in her own words, on the 3rd of August, 1962, 2 days before her death. If you go back and read that Life interview today, you find something remarkable. Marilyn sounds tired, but engaged. She talks about fame. She talks about how much it has cost her. She speaks about work and about the future. She says a very famous line, one of the last things she ever said publicly. She says, in effect, "Fame will go by, and so long, fame, I've had you. It was nice knowing you." It is tempting to read those words as proof that she could not have been planning to die. They are not proof of that. A public interview cannot tell us exactly what someone may feel in private hours later. What it can tell us is that at the end of July, Marilyn was still thinking aloud about work, identity, fame, and what might come after the image the world had made of her. That matters. It does not solve the mystery of what happened next. And in the last weeks of July and the first days of August 1962, several things happened in her life at once. 20th Century Fox reversed course. By the beginning of August, an agreement had been reached for Marilyn to return and finish Something's Got to Give for $250,000, a dramatic increase over the original arrangement, along with other concessions. The woman who had been fired and publicly blamed for the production had, on paper, fought her way back into the picture. She had also, in that same period, renewed her closeness with Joe DiMaggio. People close to them later said that the possibility of remarrying had been discussed. A more dramatic version of the story claims that a small ceremony had actually been planned for the 8th of August, 3 days after her death. That detail has been repeated for decades, including by people close to the DiMaggio family, but it has never been documented, with a marriage license application, a chapel booking, an invitation, or any other contemporary paper trail. The safest conclusion is that they were close again and that remarriage may have been discussed. Anything more precise belongs to memory, not proof. She had also, in that final week, according to her housekeeper Eunice Murray and her makeup artist Whitey Snyder, been in a state some described as unusually alert and some described as unusually agitated. Different witnesses remembered her in that last week very differently. And that is one of the things you have to accept about the story of the last week of Marilyn Monroe's life. There is no single, agreed-upon account. Different people who saw her that week later remembered different women. On Friday, the 3rd of August 1962, she spent the morning at her new house in Brentwood. She had, only a few months earlier, bought this house, a small, single-story hacienda-style home at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive. It was the first home she had ever owned. She had furnished it slowly, in a Mexican style, with tile floors and heavy wooden furniture she had picked out on a trip to Mexico earlier that year. Above the front door, there was an old ceramic tile that had been there when she bought the house, with a Latin inscription. Cursum perficio, I finish my journey. She had chosen to leave it there. Later, many people would read too much into it. It was, in truth, just a piece of tile that came with the house. On that Friday, she gave the Life magazine interview its final edit over the phone. She saw Dr. Greenson at his home. She spoke to friends on the telephone. She was, by every account of that day, functional, tired, but functional. On Saturday, the 4th of August, 1962, we have one of the most reconstructed and disputed days in 20th century celebrity history. So let's walk through it carefully, based on what witnesses actually said. In the morning, a delivery arrived at her house. A young man named Ralph Roberts, her friend and personal masseur, had planned to come over. She spoke on the phone to several people, including her friend and press agent Pat Newcomb, who had spent the previous night at the house. At some point in the early afternoon, later accounts attributed to Eunice Murray placed Robert Kennedy in Marilyn's orbit, either by telephone or, in more sensational versions, physically at the house. This is one of the most controversial claims in the entire story, and Murray's versions changed over the years. Other Los Angeles witnesses repeated variations of the same story, often long after the event. But contemporaneous evidence weighs heavily against the claim that Robert Kennedy was at 5th Helena Drive that afternoon. Records, photographs, guest accounts, and people who were with the Kennedy family place him in Northern California that weekend. That does not tell us whether a telephone call was possible. It does mean that a secret physical visit to Marilyn's house requires us to reject a substantial body of evidence without producing stronger evidence in its place. So the careful conclusion is narrower than the legend. A phone conversation has been alleged, but is not securely documented. A physical visit by Robert Kennedy that day is not supported by the strongest available contemporary evidence. What we can say is that, according to Dr. Greenson, who came to the house in the late afternoon, Marilyn was upset by early evening. He stayed with her for several hours. Pat Newcomb was asked to leave. Eunice Murray was asked to stay the night, which was unusual. Around 7 in the evening, she received a phone call from Joe DiMaggio Jr., the 21-year-old son of her ex-husband. He was still deeply close to her. She had helped raise him during her marriage to his father, and after the divorce, she had kept in touch with him for the rest of her life. He called that evening from a barracks phone at the Marine Corps base where he was stationed to tell her that he had broken up with his fiancée. She was, according to Joe Jr.'s later account, delighted by this news. She had not liked the fiancé. She laughed with him on the phone. She sounded, he said, happy. That call is one of the last relatively well-attested conversations of the evening. Joe Jr. would say for the rest of his life that she sounded happy and engaged. His memory matters because he actually spoke with her, but even that cannot tell us what her intentions were later that night. A person's mood in one telephone call is evidence of a moment, not a diagnosis of what will happen hours afterward. She then made a phone call to Peter Lawford, her friend and the president's brother-in-law. Lawford had invited her to a small dinner party at his beach house. She had declined. In this second phone call, according to Lawford's later account, her voice was different. Slurred, fading. He said, she said, and this is Lawford's reconstruction given to police years after the fact. Something like, say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to the president, and say goodbye to yourself, because you're a nice guy. Lawford, alarmed, called his own manager. His manager told him not to go to the house himself because of the political sensitivity of a Kennedy in-law being present at any scene involving Marilyn Monroe. Instead, Lawford began making phone calls, trying to reach people who could check on her. Around 8 in the evening, another friend, Sidney Gilleroff, her hairdresser, spoke with her on the phone. He would later say she sounded upset, but not desperate. And then, at some point after that, the phone went quiet. At around 3 in the morning, on the 5th of August 1962, Eunice Murray, the housekeeper who had been asked to stay overnight, later said she woke up and noticed a light under Marilyn's bedroom door. She said she found the door locked. She said she went outside in a robe and looked in the bedroom window and saw Marilyn lying face down on the bed, not moving, one hand extended toward the telephone. Here again, Eunice Murray's later recollections create problems. Over the years, she gave different times for when she became concerned, and in a television interview more than 2 decades after Marilyn's death, she made a startling remark suggesting Robert Kennedy had been at the house, then moved away from the subject. The remark became fuel for countless conspiracy books. But because it came so late, conflicted with other evidence, and emerged from a witness whose accounts had changed, it cannot responsibly be treated as a clean eyewitness record of what happened that afternoon. What we know for certain is that Eunice Murray called Dr. Ralph Greenson. Greenson rushed to the house. He broke the bedroom window with a fireplace poker. He climbed into the room. Marilyn Monroe was dead. He called her physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg, who confirmed the death. And, according to the official record, they then called the Los Angeles Police Department at 4:25 in the morning. The official sequence still leaves questions. In the earliest account, roughly an hour passed between the point at which Murray became alarmed and the call to police at 4:25. Later versions of Murray's story stretched or shifted that timeline, which is one reason later writers were able to create much larger mysterious gaps. Even the shorter interval has been debated. Why were police not called immediately? One ordinary explanation is that Greenson and Engelberg first confirmed what had happened and made calls before exposing the death of the world's most famous actress to the press. Other writers have suggested that the room was searched, papers were removed, or politically sensitive people were contacted. Those claims have been repeated for decades, but they have never been demonstrated by reliable physical evidence. The delay is a legitimate question. It is not, by itself, proof of a conspiracy. The police arrived. The coroner's office took custody of the body. Later that day, Deputy Medical Examiner Thomas Noguchi performed the autopsy. He would later become one of the most famous medical examiners in America. The toxicology showed lethal concentrations of pentobarbital and chloral hydrate. The official cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning. The official manner was recorded as probable suicide. Probable suicide. That word, probable, would matter enormously in everything written afterward. And on that word, probable, an entire generation of writers, investigators, journalists, and conspiracy theorists would build books, films, television specials, and theories for the next 60 years. We will look next at what the actual evidence says, at what the theories claim, and at how a small, quiet, walled cemetery in Westwood, Los Angeles, became one of the most visited graves in the world. So let's talk about what actually happened medically on that bed in Brentwood. Because before we get to the theories, we owe her the facts. The autopsy, performed on the 5th of August 1962 by Deputy Medical Examiner Thomas Noguchi, found levels of pentobarbital and chloral hydrate in her blood that were, by the standards of the day, unquestionably fatal. Pentobarbital is a barbiturate sleeping pill, sold at the time under the brand name Nembutol. Chloral hydrate is another sedative, an older one. Both were routinely prescribed to Marilyn by her physicians. Both, taken together, in a large enough dose, will stop a person's breathing. Noguchi found no injection marks on her body. He found no signs of a struggle. He found no bruising that suggested she had been physically forced to do anything. He did note, and this is important, that her stomach was largely empty. There were no visible undigested pill capsules in the stomach. That last finding, the empty stomach, is where the trouble began. Because within days of the death being ruled probable suicide, people began asking a simple question. If she swallowed dozens of pills, where were the pill capsules in her stomach? Where was the residue? There are medically plausible reasons why a stomach examination may show little visible capsule material even when a sedative has been swallowed. Capsules dissolve, drugs are absorbed, and the appearance of the stomach depends on timing and many other variables. Noguchi, in interviews throughout his professional life, continued to defend the official finding. In his view, the toxicology established the essential medical fact. A fatal quantity of sedative drugs had entered her body. But that empty stomach, in the summer of 1962, became the seed of every alternative theory that has ever been told about her death. Because if she did not swallow the pills, some argued, then how did the drug get into her body? And that is where the theories begin. So let's walk through them, honestly, and let's be very clear about the level of evidence for each. Theory 1. She killed herself. Deliberately, intentionally, by swallowing a lethal dose of pills, alone in her bedroom, in the late hours of the 4th of August, 1962. This is the official finding. It is supported by the medical evidence. It is supported by the fact that she had, by her own doctor's later admission, attempted overdoses before, though those earlier incidents may have been cries for help rather than genuine attempts. It is supported by the fact that she was, in the last months of her life, taking a dangerous combination of medications, and that she was, by every account, exhausted and struggling. People who reject the suicide finding often point to the same things. The telephone call with Joe DiMaggio Jr., in which she sounded cheerful. The renewed agreement with Fox. Her conversations about future work. The Life interview, in which she was still thinking about what came next. Those facts are real, and they are important to a biography of her final weeks. But they cannot establish intent one way or the other. Outward mood, professional plans, and even apparently ordinary conversations are not reliable tools for determining what a person may do later in private. Theory 2. She died accidentally, from an overdose or drug interaction she did not intend to be fatal. This possibility has attracted serious biographers, because Marilyn was using more than one powerful sedative and was being treated by more than one physician. Donald Spoto advanced a specific version of the accidental overdose theory. In his reconstruction, Marilyn had already taken barbiturates and then received additional chloral hydrate without everyone involved understanding what was already in her system. He believed Eunice Murray and Dr. Ralph Greenson may have been involved in that final medication sequence. That is Spoto's reconstruction, not an official medical finding and not a consensus among biographers. If some version of accidental overdose occurred, it would mean a tragic medication error or unintended interaction, not automatically a finding of homicide. The distinction matters. A mistake, even a catastrophic one, is not the same thing as proof that someone intended to kill her. Theory 3, and this is where we have to be very, very careful. Some writers over the last 60 years have argued that Marilyn Monroe was murdered. And they have named as suspects or as involved parties the Kennedy brothers, the CIA, the FBI, organized crime figures, and various combinations of the above. I have to say this plainly. There is no credible, verifiable, physical evidence that Marilyn Monroe was murdered. There is no photograph. There is no confession from any responsible party. There is no smoking gun in any literal or documentary sense. What there is a large number of books, most of them published from the 1970s onward, that string together suggestive claims. There is a supposed diary of Marilyn's that has been described but never authenticated. There are wiretap recordings that have been described but never independently verified. There are witnesses who came forward decades after the fact, sometimes for money, with stories that could not be corroborated. The most extreme versions of these theories claim that Robert Kennedy, or agents working for him, came to her house that night, introduced a fatal dose of drugs into her body, and staged the scene. There is no medical evidence of an injection, no authenticated confession, and no reliable contemporary eyewitness placing such a team in her bedroom. There are allegations, but allegations are not physical evidence. And there is another piece of the historical record that conspiracy retellings often skip. In 1982, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office conducted a formal re-examination of the case after years of murder allegations. Investigators reviewed the available medical evidence, witness claims, and conspiracy theories. They did not find credible evidence sufficient to support a murder case, and they found no basis to overturn the original conclusion. That review cannot make every contradiction in the 1962 record disappear. It does tell us that the murder claims were examined officially and did not produce proof. I am telling you this not to demand that you accept every detail of the original story without question. I am telling you this because we owe Marilyn a distinction between mystery and invention. The medical cause of her death is not unknown. Acute barbiturate poisoning is documented. What remains uncertain is the exact sequence by which the drugs were taken, the degree of intention behind the fatal dose, and the reliability of conflicting recollections from people around her. Those are real uncertainties. They do not, by themselves, prove that an assassin entered the house. What we do know is what happened next. The news broke in Los Angeles in the middle of the morning on the 5th of August, 1962. By noon, it had been broadcast across the United States. By evening, it was on the front page of every major newspaper in the world. The Times of London, Le Monde in Paris, Pravda in Moscow. Even the Vatican's newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, published a small note about her death. Joe DiMaggio, who had been in San Francisco, got on a plane immediately. He arrived in Los Angeles, went to the funeral home and took over the arrangements. He would not allow anyone from Hollywood into the funeral. He barred, by name, most of the studio executives she had worked with. He barred Peter Lawford and, through him, the Kennedy family. He barred almost every actor and director she had known. At the small chapel at Westwood Village Memorial Park on the 8th of August 1962, there were fewer than 30 mourners. Her half-sister Bernice, her business manager, her lawyer, her New York friends the Strasbergs, a handful of others. Lee Strasberg gave the eulogy. Joe DiMaggio, in a dark suit, wept openly in the front row. He had, according to those present, placed a single small bouquet of pink roses in her folded hands inside the casket. She was interred in a wall crypt in the mausoleum, in a marble drawer that would be marked simply Marilyn Monroe, 1926-1962. Now, here is a small and beautiful thing that Joe DiMaggio did after that funeral. For roughly the next 20 years, Joe arranged for fresh roses to be delivered regularly to that crypt, famously 3 times a week for much of that period, with the frequency later reduced. He did not turn the ritual into a publicity campaign. He gave no memoir about their marriage and almost never discussed her in interviews. When reporters asked him about Marilyn, he usually walked away or made it clear that the subject was private. He never remarried. Accounts from people around him describe photographs and memories of Marilyn remaining part of his private life. When he died in 1999, at the age of 84, his attorney Morris Engelberg later said that Joe's final words were, "I'll finally get to see Marilyn." It is an unforgettable line, and it has become part of the DiMaggio legend. But because the account comes through Engelberg and has been disputed by others, it should be remembered as a reported last statement, not as a fact we can independently prove. Some love stories end, and some, as it turns out, just keep going, in silence, in a private room with a photograph by the bed, for another 37 years. The house on 5th Helena Drive is still there. It is a private residence today. People sometimes drive by. There's not much to see. A wall, a gate, a driveway. But if you know what you are looking for, and you have the address, you can stand on that quiet street in Brentwood and remember that a woman lived there, briefly, and finished her journey in a small bedroom, alone or not alone, on a warm August night. The crypt is at Westwood Village Memorial Park, which is now surrounded by tall office buildings on Wilshire Boulevard. Millions of people have visited it in the last 60 years. It is one of the most visited graves in the United States. The marble in front of her name is worn smooth from the touch of visitors' fingers. Some leave lipstick kisses on it. The cemetery staff clean them off. Every day they come back. And it is worth asking, 60+ years later, why? Why this woman? Why not any of the other actresses of her generation who lived longer, made more films, or gave performances that critics might call more sophisticated? The answer, I think, begins with the fact that Marilyn Monroe became a symbol of a particular kind of American story, and a particular kind of American loss. She was the girl who came from almost nothing, a ward of the state, an orphanage, foster homes, a teenage marriage, a factory job. And she made herself, deliberately, one decision at a time, into one of the most photographed women on earth. And then, once she was there, the very fame she had wanted turned out to be something she could not entirely survive. That story is a story America has been telling itself in different forms ever since. about Elvis Presley, about Judy Garland, about Michael Jackson, about Whitney Houston, about many others. Marilyn was one of the earliest modern versions of that story at full celebrity scale. A person famous not only for the work, but for the face, the private life, the romances, the body, the pain, and the endless public attempt to explain all of it. She became famous in an age when mass magazines, studio publicity, news photography, television, and gossip could combine to make a human being feel present everywhere at once. There is a photograph taken by Bert Stern in what has come to be called the last sitting, in the last weeks of her life. In it, she is holding a red scarf up in front of her face and looking at the camera over the top of it with one eye. She looks, in that picture, like a woman who is playing a game. And you get the strange sense, when you look at it, that she knows something you don't know yet. She was, when it was taken, 36 years old. She had, by any reasonable estimate, another 40 years of life she should have lived. She had, still ahead of her, the part she was going to grow into. The roles that women in their 50s and 60s get in the movies. The interview she would have given in the 1970s, in the 1980s, if she had lived. The book she said in her live interview she wanted one day to write. None of that happened. What we have instead is what she made in 36 years. 30 films, 29 of which were released in her lifetime, and one, Something's Got to Give, which was left unfinished. A handful of photographs that have become, without exaggeration, some of the most reproduced images in the history of human civilization. A voice, a laugh, a walk that people have been imitating for over 60 years and will probably still be imitating 100 years from now. And a story. A story of a little girl in an iron bed in an orphanage on North El Centro Avenue in Los Angeles, who lay in the dark and imagined that one day her name would mean something. And who was right. Above the door of her house in Brentwood, that Latin phrase was still there when she died. Cursum perficio, I finish my journey. Whoever had put those words there, on a piece of ceramic tile, some builder or previous owner sometime in the 1920s, could not have known who would eventually live behind that door. Marilyn noticed the phrase after taking possession of the house and chose to leave the tile in place. Whatever private meaning she attached to it then, no contemporary evidence suggests she selected those words as a prediction of her own death. She was 36 years old when she read that phrase for the first time, and 36 years old when it became, without her ever intending it to, an epitaph. So the next time you see her, on a poster, on a t-shirt, in a piece of footage in a documentary, or in a photograph on a red velvet background, on a calendar that was supposed to end her career and ended up starting it, remember that behind that face there was a person, Norma Jeane Mortensen, born in Los Angeles General Hospital on the 1st of June 1926, died in a small house in Brentwood on the 5th of August 1962. 36 years, 2 months and 4 days, she made herself. And in the end, she stayed, in the pictures, in the voice, in the small tile above the door. Cursum perficio. I finish my journey. Thank you, from me, for staying with me all the way to the end of hers.